All right, welcome everybody. This is Main Street Message. I'm your host, Brandon Ludwig. We are inside the Harco Media Network. I have a special guest with me tonight. Also off camera, we have Mr. Drakewatson, host of Hometown Huddle. Drake, thanks for sitting in with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Great to learn a little bit about what you guys are going to be talking about this evening, and I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say.
And our special guest tonight, Mr. Don Jones, Executive Director for USDA. Mr. Jones, thank you for coming in tonight.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Before we get started, I kind of let's jump into my time machine. Let's go back to 2005. I'm a senior walking through the halls, probably 3 classes in a row where I'm working in the office. Probably wasn't on either one of our bingo cards that me and you'd be sitting here today talking about some of the interesting things that we're going to get to talk about.
No, it was not on my bingo card at all. And I tell everyone, if you would have asked me, even 8 or 10 years ago, this was not on my list of things to do. I was content being the ag teacher at Harrison Central, and things were going good, but it was time for a change, and we changed it up in a big way.
And here we are.
Yes, here we are.
So let's
both of us. I mean,
yeah.
There's probably a lot of people at Harrison Central shaking their heads thinking, look at those two guys.
Especially that class of 05 on my end.
It was a talented class, we'll say that.
So let's get right into some of the questions here. First one, it's going to be an easy one for you. Just tell us your life path from, education to elected official, now executive director of USDA, and how each one of those roles have kind of like shaped you into each position and allowed you to have the growth to do what you're doing today.
Sure. And I like to share this story with a lot of people because I think it's a unique story. Growing up in Harrison County, graduated from Caddis High School and the Harrison Career Center back in 1990, but went to school to be a special education teacher, had the goal of being a special education teacher and a wrestling coach, and I didn't do either one of those. Got a call to be a substitute ag science teacher, and for 23 years, I spent 1 year at the Harrison Career Center, 3 years at Lakeland, and 19 years at Harrison Central. Being the ag teacher and leading the FFA program was my life. And, as an educator, we had a lot of things on our plate. And, people would come to my room, we would eat lunch, and we were like, who thinks of all these extra, activities and, things that we had to do that really weren't related to teaching. So in 2018, I'd built a relationship with our state rep at the time, which was Andy Thompson from Marietta. He was really known as Mr. Anti-Common Core. And we had a lot of conversations about education. And, I asked him, who was going to take his place. He was term limited. And, he had suggested that I think about it. And I said, no, not a chance. And, I got to thinking, part of the problem with education is people that made decisions about what we as teachers did, most of them were not former teachers or educators or had been involved much with the school, but they had an interest. And so in 2018, we ran for the State House, and we were successful. And being in that role, I was appointed vice chairman of the Primary and Secondary Education Committee as a freshman member of the Ohio House. And 10 months into my first term, the chairman of the committee got appointed to the Senate, and I was elevated from vice chair to chair of the Education Committee. I was the only freshman chairman in the 133rd General Assembly, and which was quite an honor. But I didn't just get my feet wet. I got thrown clear into the fire, and so to speak. And I was very blessed. In the Ohio House, I was a freshman chairman. My second year, I was in leadership. Served as majority whip, and then my third term, I was on the finance committee and was chair of the sub-finance committee for agricultural, natural resources, and development, which was one of the bigger subcommittees because we handled a lot of money in those 3 areas. And then in my fourth term, I was elected to my fourth and final term, and I had the pleasure of doing something again that most people don't. And I was fortunate enough to chair 2 standing committees in the same month. I was natural resource chairman at the beginning of the term, at the beginning of the General Assembly. 5 months in May, the speaker calls and says, hey, I need you to chair the ag committee again. So I chaired the natural resource committee one week. I chaired the ag committee the following week, which is not common. And then about a week after I had chaired that committee, I got a call from the Trump-Vance administration asking me to lead the Farm Service Agency to, that's the role that I'm in today. But, every one of those jobs from the time I started teaching to being a state rep to being, I have learned, I've had to elevate my skill set. I've had to, learn some more patience because the bureaucracy is real at the state level. It's real at the federal level. But, most importantly, a lot of the skills and the things I learned growing up here in Harrison County, being on the Soil and Water Board, the Fair Board, involved in the, the community fire department and E-squads, that all prepared me well for these jobs. And, I never had them on my bingo card. So, I've been very fortunate. I've had a lot of opportunities that most people don't get to, have, and I've been able to take advantage of them. And, and I'm grateful for this administration, the Trump-Vance administration and Secretary Rollins. I mean, they're the ones that appointed me to this position. And, there's one of me in every state, so I'm one of 50 across the country. And I do have a colleague that's also a presidential appointee that works for USDA in rural development, which we're going to talk a little bit, I think, about that. So, but I've been just truly blessed to, and I've never forgotten where I came from. That's the thing that I think has kept me grounded. And I've had several people appreciate the fact that I'm the same guy today that I was when I left Harrison
You're
Central.
looking at one of them that appreciates that, because
Right.
I can attest to not forgetting where you came from with
Right.
the conversations we've had over the years. So kind of what I got from that, education, you're hearing those voices that don't feel like they're heard, put you in a position young and into the state rep position to chair those and kind of grow into that and take it head on, which when the opportunity came to go to the next level, all those things just kind of put you in those places, gave you that confidence, gave you that knowledge and experience to just, be able to take that on and do the best that you can with each one.
And Brandon, you're right, and the value of this, and I repeat this, a lot to young people. I mean, and you embrace it every day in the role that you have. Relationships are important, and that is something that I can't stress enough to young people. You don't get to the level that I am without having good relationships, and having a work ethic, and not just having the relation, but proving yourself. And and it was just like the work that I had done in the Ohio House, in the ag sector, that got me to this position, because there was a gentleman that was in my role during Trump 45 that wanted to come back, and it was between he and I, and I was fortunate enough to get the appointment. But a lot of it came back to the work that I had done in that space, as ag, and I forgot in my third term, I was chairman of the ag committee. Again, in my third term, I replaced a person had been removed as chairman, and so I chaired, not only the finance subcommittee, but also ag in my third term as well. But those relationships, and the value of them, that's how we get things done. I mean, and that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I kind of just take from what you just said, there's one in every state, so there's 50 of yous, but Ohio is like a really important state when it comes to ag.
We are, we are part of the Midwest, what they call the Midwest region. And I will say that, and for people that, I tell everyone, you got to get outside of Harrison County. You have got to start looking at the big picture, because, we're one of 88 counties. I mean, and, they're going to pass money out to the squeaky wheel. And I mean, we've got to learn to be that squeaky wheel. But, in the Midwest region, it's Ohio, it's Michigan, it's in, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Missouri, and Iowa. We are in a group of states that we're all bigger states. We're all ag states, and we kind of set the bar for the rest of the country because of what we do. And the thing that's unique about Ohio, and a lot of my colleagues have said this, we here in Ohio are very diverse. I mean, we have the wine making, the grapes, we have the specialty crops, we have corn, soybeans, wheat, we have livestock. I mean, we are not one or two, three dimensional. I mean, we're very, diverse, and we grow vegetables. I mean, we've got a lot. I mean, you go down south, in the southern part of the state. I mean, strawberries are a big deal. I mean, those folks are, they're planting tomatoes down there already because that's just what we do. And and we are, we're very blessed to live where we live. But being a part of that Midwest region, and the conversations. I mean, when we look at the whole country, the Midwest region, which we're a part of, we really carry a lot of the water for the United States Department of Agriculture.
There are many states, I think, that you could easily define, and I don't think Ohio is one of those because of, I mean, you could argue that we are in Appalachia in Harrison County, and especially as you go further southeast, and so there's so much diversity, as you said. When you're representing a rural part of the state, I guess describe maybe the differences between yourself and your colleagues from the urban areas of the big three that you're working with in the past on a day in, day out basis. And I mean, you've probably seen things that they haven't seen. They've probably seen things that you haven't seen. Describe kind of if that was eye-opening at all, or what the differences were between you and those folks.
That's a great question, because I'll never forget whenever I went into General Assembly in 2019, we had a lot of rain and we had a lot of road slips in, eastern Ohio. I mean, because of the weather. And when we started talking about road slips, a lot of my colleagues in the western part of the state, they're like, what do you mean road slips? They didn't understand, because, when you're flat, you don't have hills, we're in unglaciated Ohio. I mean, we have challenges that other people, when you explain to them that, broadband is not common. I mean,
Yeah.
and you're right. I've said this many times. Once a teacher, always a teacher. And I mean, you have to take those opportunities to educate people. And I still do that in this role today. But it's funny, because when you get those folks out of those urban areas and the suburban areas, they're like, oh wow.
Yeah.
Some of them have visited. They love the beauty we have here, with our lakes and with our topography. But, they also get their eyes opened up when they realize that not every town has clean water. Things that they take for granted. What do you mean you don't have septic or a sewer system? They don't know what a septic tank is because they don't have them. But yeah, so we've had to educate our colleagues on that. One of the beauties of being in this role here is all of my colleagues across the country, the majority of them are farmers, whether it be livestock or grain. And, so the education part, we just have to educate them about, the things that we do a little different in Ohio because of, again, the diversity of the crops and the livestock that we grow. But it's not quite as difficult, in this role, because, we're looking at a statewide and again, and I work with some really good people across the country. I will tell you, they're top notch. Yeah.
So let's kind of dive back into this role as state rep, 95th district. I mean, I know just as much as you. A lot of people know that 95th district, which has been reshaped since. But when you first took over, I mean, it was all the way up in Carroll County, all the way down to Marietta. Kind of just talk about your biggest impact that you had as state rep in that big of a geographic area with infrastructure projects, capital bill projects, business development. I mean, a business in Marietta is not going to be the same business that's up in Harrison County. So kind of having that wide range and just having to put on different hats in every community you went to aren't the same things that everyone needs in
Brandon,
each county.
you're exactly right. And that was a challenge, because what was needed in Carroll County was totally separate from what was needed in Washington County. Noble County was a lot like Harrison County, small county, very rural, very small population. But, the thing I had to learn very quickly was, what the needs were and how they were different. And you're exactly right. There were infrastructure, challenges in a lot of, our more rural areas of the district. And, Carroll County was a little bit unique because, they were probably a little further ahead. I think the gas and oil had started there sooner, but we in Harrison County, I mean, we were working on sewer project here in Caddis, obviously, but Noble County had water issues. I mean, I'll never forget, they had 3 or 4 water companies or whatever that were all trying to supply water in Noble County. The one system was so poor or so bad shape, they lost more water through leaks on a daily basis than they sold. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. But to differentiate from those, those differences, was very good for me. It helped me to understand the challenges are going to be different, and just because, the top of the district, from the top of Carroll County down to Barlow, which was the bottom of my district, was 142 miles. There was a big difference from top to bottom. But, we worked, to try to bring dollars to every one of those counties, through capital bill, through different, bills that we accomplished. And we were pretty successful in getting something in every county that was a need. I mean, and the one thing that I will say that was a really common theme, it was the agriculture. I mean, the county fairs in every one of those counties. I mean, the county fair is a big deal. Even though Belmont County had new facilities because they'd moved their fairgrounds, earlier, they still had needs. Harrison County, we built a barn. We built a horse barn here. They built a facility up in Carroll County, that they use for a community center. They're multi-purpose buildings, and I've always said, the county fairgrounds, in my opinion, every county or a lot of counties are the most underutilized piece of property in the county because they only use them for the county fair.
But the layers that you can kind of go in with a county fair, when you have an attractive fair and you bring people from outside the community, outside the county, that want to come to those fairs because of how they're ran and what they have to offer, that's bringing people into your community, spending dollars at your local businesses, eating at your local restaurants.
And you're right. I mean, and one of the projects that I'm proud of that we got done here in Harrison County, and you were involved as well, was the stage project at Sally Buffalo. I mean, look at what that has done and the people that it has brought into our county that we didn't have before.
Yeah, when you can walk out in a crowd during a concert and talk to people and they find out that you're having another concert the next day, and then they go stay at the hotel, and then they spend the rest of the next day before the concert, shopping or going to sightseeing.
Because they're coming from all between Columbus and Pittsburgh and everything. Like the kinds of folks that you meet, they say they're there for a specific person, and they came from Pittsburgh, they came from Buckeye Lake, they came from wherever.
Yeah, I mean, we had people come from Canada, Florida for Neil McCoy, that have never been to Harrison County and may never come back, but it's somebody outside the community that we're bringing in to support, everybody in the county as well.
And that's the kind of picture that I had in my mind whenever we start doing projects, and I like to think big. I mean, we had talked about trying to do something at the county fairgrounds, to bring in some of those, but you needed to have a venue, and that is something that it just wasn't going to happen at the fairgrounds because it couldn't be utilized enough, and with the way the grandstand was, and we had talked with several people, but you're right. I mean, you've got to have something that attracts people. Yes.
One of those things too, I think we had some conversations in the years past. Nibble Caldwell did something pretty unique with a capital build project. I believe it was a skating rink or something like that.
So yeah, what they did in Caldwell was they call it a Hallmark Christmas, and they take and turn their downtown area really into like a Hallmark movie. I mean, they had a portable ice skating rink that they brought in. I mean, they did things on the town square. I mean, they decorated. They put a lot into that, and it brought a lot of people into their community as well. I mean, those are the types of things that you've got to do something unique, And when I tell people, when you can come to Harrison County or Eastern Ohio, you've got the courthouse lighting over in Cambridge. You've got the Nutcrackers in Steubenville. The Christmas card thing at Sally Buffalo. I mean, you could spend, the lights in Oglebay. I mean, you can spend, a couple days in, or weekend in Eastern Ohio doing something different every evening or every day. We had some friends drove over from Cincinnati, and they had never really been much past Columbus. And they came over, and I mean, they went to the Nutcracker Village. I mean, they were just, we took them and we went to, we took them around Harrison County, showed them, Clark Gable's birthplace, and it was just things that they didn't even realize was in Ohio. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, getting those projects and up and down my district, was a big deal because, as I said, they're going to give that money to somebody, and I wanted to come back to my district.
Yeah, and I kind of like the uniqueness of the district and the different styles of projects. I mean, don't get me wrong, infrastructure is a really important thing right now in Eastern Ohio. I think every small community is dealing with it. We've seen news specials, town hall meetings where that's all they talk about. Right. So the fact that so much money has come back to the district for those things is a sign of like the things that you've been able to do for these small communities and make an impact that not everybody sees because it's underground and you don't see it every day, but it's such an important thing for everything, for business development, for growth, for everything.
And you're right, you can't grow if you don't have infrastructure, and again, it's something that people just don't really understand, and infrastructure is more than just water and sewer. I mean, it's electric, it's natural gas. I mean, broadband. I mean, broadband is something that we need desperately in small rural communities, because how are you ever going to start a business or do anything if you don't have access to broadband to where you can get your product out there? And and I will say we voted for House Bill 2 during my time there in South Central Power. They were fortunate enough, they were awarded, I think, $98 million, and they supply electric here in Harrison and Eastern Ohio, and they're running fiber right now. I mean, they're hanging fiber on the poles, and it's going to be, everybody says it'll be the best thing that anybody's probably ever had, because it'll be hardwired. It's not going to be hooked to anything else. But those are the types of things that I don't think people realize how valuable they are until they have them, because we've always gotten along without them.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, we're going to go into one more question before we get into the good stuff of what you're doing right now. But let's talk a little bit. And I know you came prepared with some notes, and if you need to use them, by all means, get them. But let's talk a little bit about rural development and the different funding agencies that allow these small communities, allow these businesses, allow these potential for these big projects to happen without that ability for these communities to take these low interest loans, these long-term loans. It makes small communities, it makes a struggle for them to do projects at the scale that they need done.
That, Brandon, you hit the nail squarely on the head. My colleague, there's myself as a presidential appointee at the Farm Service Agency, and then my colleague is at Rural Development. And their job, we work with the farmers, they work with the communities around the farms to help bring those projects to life. And you're exactly right. This administration has made it very clear that they value rural America. They want projects to be done. And I mean, my colleague, Charles Tassel's his name. He's working with a lot of communities, and you said it. They're long-term. They're 40-year loans. They make it affordable, and they're low-interest loans. I mean, we talk low interest. We're talking like 1 or 2%. And this is going to sound bad, but they don't want to mess with like a $300,000 loan. They want to deal with those $1 million loans because they know that it's going to have a bigger impact on a greater amount of people. And, this administration, and we're blessed to have Vice President J.D. Vance from Ohio, and he knows growing up in Southern Ohio the challenges that we have. And I think you're going to see a lot more rural development dollars making their way into communities for the projects like you've talked about, for water, for sewer, and fire departments. I mean, they have those loan programs. The biggest challenge that most of our communities have is there's usually got to be a match. And that's the challenge, because it's usually a 25% match. But but we have to look at it from a taxpayer standpoint. Do we want the government being the sole provider of funds for our projects? We don't. But the rural development, my colleague in rural development, he he spends a lot of time out visiting communities and, projects to make sure they're being done, they're on a time schedule. And that's something else. I mean, we do not want to see, folks get a loan or get a grant and then not do the project. So that's why, and we got into a situation, not just south of us here in Belmont County, Congressman Bill Johnson got, $3.4 million for them to build a new fire station in Belmont. They didn't have the 25% match. It was $1 million, and that was they finally got it, but they were on the verge of losing that money, but they got to have some skin in the game.
And that's a lot of things I noticed personally myself in the line of work. It's like a Rubik's Cube or, like a jigsaw puzzle. Community's got to kind of play with funding, whether you can get a grant from this agency to use towards that match. There's a lot of things that go in, they're just not going to give you $3 million without you, putting some skin in the game, as you just said. So there's a lot of behind the scenes work when it comes to, how can we make this work to where it's best for the community, but, also best for everyone involved.
Yeah. And I think that's something that people need to understand is we have to have buy-in from the local community, before we start just, moving projects. We want everybody to understand, this is, and sometimes it's grant money that doesn't have to be paid back, but more often than not, it's a loan. It's a 40-year loan. But when you start looking at a 40-year loan with a 1 or 2% interest, it makes those projects that look really big become affordable, and they can get it done.
Yeah,
and you're
absolutely.
right. The down payment, and there are grants to help cover the down payment portion. Absolutely.
All right, so let's jump in a little bit what you got going on right now. From your perspective, what is one misconception people have about USDA and its role in rural communities?
So that I appreciate that question because whenever people found out that I had changed jobs, a lot of people wasn't aware, but I don't know how they weren't because it was pretty widely publicized. But when they hear that you are the executive director for the USDA Farm Service Agency, they hear USDA and they think it's just farm only. And that is probably the biggest misconception. But here's the thing that most people don't realize. There's 29 agencies under the umbrella of USDA. I am only in charge of one of those 29 agencies. And, we have agencies that, we talk about rural development. That's another one. Our sister agency that we talk a lot about is the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. And they provide a lot of the technical services for the farmers that we work with in our programs. But probably the biggest misconception with most people is they don't understand that USDA is not just farming. It has a lot to do with rural communities and helping to make sure that rural America is successful, and not just for the farmer, but for the people who live, the community that lives around and supports that farmer. And I think that's probably the biggest misconception because most people don't understand. Well, they're like, well, why is USDA giving money to build a sewage treatment plant? Because it ups the quality of life in a community. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What opportunities do you see for younger or new farmers entering agriculture in Ohio? There's a lot going on across the state. We talked about this before the show started. There's a lot going on with Ohio in general in different parts. You go to a different part of the state, you're looking at a different style of farming, different crops, things like that.
We have a lot of beginning farmer programs, young farmer programs through the Farm Service Agency and the other agencies under the USDA umbrella. And again, I can't stress this enough. This administration, President Trump and Secretary Rollins have made this a priority to make sure that our young folks have access, because we know the biggest hurdle for young people entering is access to capital and land. And that is something that this administration has made very clear, that we have youth loans. We start with youth loans, and this is something that people are going to just be mind blown a little bit. We will let 10-year-olds borrow money from the United States Department of Agriculture through the Farm Service Agency, up to $10,000 for a revenue-generating project. 10 years old. Nobody's going to do that. I mean, and that youth loan is good for someone from the ages of 10 to 20. We have a beginning farmer and rancher program where they can apply for what we call microloans. So, if they've demonstrated a little bit of success, with possibly a youth loan, and they graduate, they get turned 21 or 22, 23, we put them into a microloan to help them build a barn, buy a bigger piece of equipment, because we want, we at the Farm Service Agency, we will work with those, and we have, a beginning farmer and rancher program in conjunction with our friends at NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, to help them get that first piece of property. At the Farm Service Agency, we have loan programs up to $600,000 to help a young person buy their first farm. We work with, and we are never going to compete with any local lending institution. We are always the second call. We want them to go to the local bank. We want them to work with their local financing, institutions, but we will work with those financial institutions as well, and we'll guarantee some of those loans so that bank will give that young person that loan, because let's face it, a lot of them don't have credit established. But, Secretary Rollins, I mean, she is from Texas. She grew up on a farm. She was big in 4-H and FFA. She gets this. I mean, and again, the Trump-Vance administration, J.D. Vance, being our vice president, he knows. I mean, I don't think he was ever in FFA, but, growing up, he knows how tough it is to get started. So, we are working with a lot, and I will say I attended we work with Ag Credit. They're our biggest lending partner here in Ohio, and I'll say this, we lead the country in working with guaranteed loans with financial institutions. We're proud of that. And, and one of the things that people have to understand, I went to this Ag Credit conference they had a couple weeks ago, and you would have been amazed at how many young people were there, young couples. And that's not something that most people, they think, oh, it's all doom and gloom, it's hard. But I'm going to say this, we are very, very fortunate that this administration has put money forward and made it a priority, because we know our average age is 58, I think, of our average farmer. We need that next generation, and we have to give them that opportunity so that they can farm.
Yeah, that's probably a follow-up question I was going to have. Do you see that youth coming up? And it sounds like you answered that pretty well with what you've seen.
And I'm going to go a step further. You look at a lot of the folks that work in our offices. We have 66 offices across the state of Ohio. We have 66 offices, 257 employees today that work with the Farm Service Agency here in Ohio. A lot of our employees, we have a nice mix, but I'm going to say that we have a lot of younger employees that are under the age, many under the age of 30, but there's a lot between that 25 and 35, and again, the president and Secretary Rollins, that we know the value of getting this next generation, not only on the farm, but also in our offices. And one of the goals is to modernize how we do things. And that's going to be a little bit of a heavy lift, but we know that we can do it because, technology is coming. It's here. It's been here. Some people have embraced it. I mean, we have precision agriculture. We have tractors that drive themselves, which is kind of scary, but, it can be done, and it is being done. But, we want to make it more user-friendly so that our people aren't taking time out of their schedules to come into our offices to sign papers. If we can, we can use technology. We can send them to an email. We can do one box. I mean, and it takes that younger generation of workers to help get that done, because we know this. A third of our customers, our farmers, they embrace technology. They can't get enough of it. That's our younger ones. We have another third that I fit into that, middle age, we'll use technology if we have to, but we can still go to the office if we can. And then you have that older third, that older population, that most of them don't want anything to do with it because it's the way they've always done it before. But one of the first meetings we had with one of my supervisors, Administrator Bill Beam, he said, we are going to modernize the Farm Service Agency. And it is a goal of Secretary Rollins and this administration. We proved it. We just rolled out at the end of February, it was called the Farmer Bridge Assistance. $12 billion is what was set aside. $11 billion of that was rolled out at the end of February. In the first 2 or 3 weeks here in Ohio, we had distributed almost $250 million to our farmers in 2 weeks through using login.gov and allowing those people to come in and using the technology to have those forms already pre-filled. All they had to do was walk in, sign them, they were submitted, they had their money direct deposited. We have a real push. It's one of my goals here in Ohio. We want to get everybody to direct deposit because we know the challenges of, getting things through the mail sometimes are hard, especially in rural Ohio. And, and there's people that make a living trying to, steal checks, and we are making strides, great strides, to get people to go to direct deposit. It's more secure. They have their money much faster, and they don't have to make a trip to the bank.
You talk about a lot of things that make it seem as though, you guys are really big on incentivizing maybe younger folks to get involved in the world of agriculture. Maybe 100 years ago, you wouldn't say that same thing. What's, I guess, your take on the fact that there is a necessity maybe to incentivize those types of things? The importance of that and such.
We as I said, we realize that our farmers are getting older. We know that it is getting harder, and we've seen it here in Harrison County. I mean, we have no dairy farms left, and one of the ideas, for a lot of years has been you get bigger, you get out, and a lot of dairy farmers have gotten out. I mean, and part of the problem is, and this is where I think we need to bring bring that younger generation in. The reason we are, dairy farming is not as profitable as it used to be. We're too efficient. We're producing as much milk today in the United States with half as many cows as we had 50 years ago.
Okay.
Because of genetics, because of feeding, and because of technology. And and it's one of those things that we've realized, and this administration has really realized, we have to get that younger generation of people starting to come back to the farm, because if we don't, we're going to lose another segment of our industry. I mean, the dairy farming is just one example. I mean, but and I will say it also with our corn and soybean farmers. We are seeing, and I spoke of this earlier at a Farm Bureau event here in Harrison County. Back 40 years ago, if you raised 100 bushel of corn per acre, you'd really done something. If you're only raising 100 bushel of corn to an acre today, you're kind of a failure, because but there again, it's been through genetics, it's been through land management, it's been through a lot of things that our younger generation understands, because they get the technology, they get the precision ag. We can set planters to with satellites to shut the seed off whenever it gets to where it's already planted. But again, the administration realizes we need that next generation, and if we are not going to help them get there, nobody else is either.
Right.
And I think that's something that and again, Secretary Rollins, believe it or not, her and I are the same age. I told her she's aged much better than I have, but and I joked with her, but she gets it, and I think that's the thing that's so encouraging for me being a part of this, is because we all farm. Mm-hmm. We all know, we're not a bunch of political appointees that are just, this is a lifestyle that we've all lived, we've embraced, and I think that speaks volumes to, again, them, and I say them, the administration, filling these roles with people who can get the job done.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to, educator, what you taught in education,
right?
Representing the 95th district, seeing what that part of Ohio deals with, and being a farmer all your life and a family farmer at that. So just having all three of those things, what it allowed you to do, what allowed you to see going in before you even started.
Well, and as I said earlier, the gentleman who was in this role during Trump 45, he wanted to come back, and a lot of my colleagues are back for their second term. But it was one of those things that the work that I had done, and you're right, everything that I had done through being an ag teacher, being a state legislator, living on a farm my entire life, I still have cows, I still make hay. I mean, this is, that means something to this administration, and I can't say enough, about how thankful I am for them doing that, and it's something that, we still have to educate some of our colleagues. I mean, and Senator Husted and Senator Marino, those are the two gentlemen that nominated me for this role. I've had to educate them on some things, and they'll call me. But again, I appreciate whenever they get something in front of them, they're like, hey, Director, help us understand, is this something that we need to support or not support? It goes back to those relationships. So,
putting up hay, I can say this, I can vouch for this. I've talked to you on the phone when you're on your way back or heading to Marietta. I've also talked to you, whether it's on a weekend or late at night, and you're in a tractor putting up hay.
Right.
And you always seem to answer your phone, so I definitely do appreciate all those calls that you took at odd times and kind of helped me through whatever we needed to get through. So,
but I think that, again, Brandon, that goes back to, just being real. I mean, we're not in a bubble. Our goal is to help as many people as we can, and for me, I appreciate when people are willing to go the extra mile to do what needs to be done. And I mean, and that was, the relationship that you and I have had ever since I got into the legislature. And I appreciate that, because there are people that they want to take your time, but they'll never want to make it. They don't want to do anything. They just want you to tell them, all the secrets, but then they do nothing with them. That's a frustrating thing for me. And, I have to see progress.
So you kind of touched on, I think there's a lot of forward thinking going on right now within what you're doing. What policy changes or priorities do you expect to see from, USDA, in the next few years that will impact Ohio agriculture? You kind of touched on the lending and making everything direct deposit and things like that. Is there kind of anything else that you guys are kind of looking at and saying these are things that we need to be prepared for or to kind of tackle?
I wished I had a crystal ball, because, everything that a lot of what we do is the result of what's in the Farm Bill. And, we're working under a Farm Bill that was written in 2018. It expired in 2023. It has been extended twice. This Congress that is in there right now, the one big beautiful bill that was passed last year, there were a lot of upgrades and updates to some of the provisions of the Farm Bill, but not as many as what we needed. There's work, and the president has made it very clear, and the secretary has too. There are things that we need to do to be able to continue to work in the ag space. I know Congress, the House has passed, the House Ag Committee has passed what we call Farm Bill 2.0. It has not passed the full House yet, but we are hopeful that some of those things will continue to, progress, because, the one big beautiful bill was a great start. I mean, it set aside dollars to continue some of our conservation reserve programs that are big up in the northern part of the state. And the CRP contracts basically sets aside property, so that it's not farmed, because here again, we got a problem of overproducing already. But, we're also looking at the quality of water quality, Lake Erie. I mean, there's been a lot of money spent on practices to help water quality. I think you're going to see this administration try to cut some of the red tape and some of this regulations, and that's something, the emission standards that have been placed on a lot of our, the DEF, the DPF filters. That's something this administration has already work to address, because that's expensive, so those are things that we're hopeful will continue, but it's all really going to be up to what Congress does and what the president and vice president and the secretary can get their colleagues and the or the members of Congress to realize that we have to do. I'm hopeful that we will continue, and I'm very hopeful that we are successful in the midterm elections, and we can continue the momentum that has been built since this administration has taken office. Last year, we have had a very, very busy year. I mean, and we want to continue that, and it's something that but it'll be up to what we get from Congress. I mean, we will continue to work. And we've got wildfires right now that are really ravaging, some of our friends in Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Kansas. 850,000 acres is what I heard last.
Wow.
We know we're going to have to help those folks out there. And again, that's the kind of stuff that, has to continue. If that doesn't continue, the help from the Farm Service Agency and the USDA, that's going to be devastating to the ag industry. And again, they're losing hay supplies. They're losing livestock. Cattle are getting, they can't get out of the pastures because, the fires are spreading so quickly. So it's things like that, we'll have to, I'm sure that we will continue to do. But I think we will continue to modernize how we do business. We want to be more efficient in how we do business. But we're hopeful, that we get some more tools from our friends in Congress. And the one big beautiful bill, we are starting to see the effects of that. It was signed last summer, and we're starting to see some of those, some of the fruition from some of those programs that were a part of that.
You talked about the midterms, the primary in Ohio. This is probably an important date to note. Is it May 5th or May 3rd?
May 5th.
Okay, May 5th.
Yeah,
that's probably a big day.
Yeah, yep. And and again, we depend on Congress to pass legislation that directs the work that we do at the Farm Service Agency, but that doesn't mean that the president and the secretary don't have their list of things that they want to get accomplished too. So, and that was evident with the one big beautiful bill. I mean, there was a lot of things in there. We talked about getting rid of some of the emission standards. That's a huge thing. I mean, that's an added expense that, and a lot of our farmers, they really don't want a handout. They want a level playing field. Mm-hmm. And that's something that, we have been playing from behind for so long, because we were the only country in the world that had bought into the emission standards. I mean, and these companies were building engines specifically for the North American market because we were the only ones that were doing all this extra, stuff, and it's been costly, and that's something that people, farmers are like, just get rid of some of the things that we have to do that no one else has to do, because we work on a global market. That's what I know my colleague or my friend Brian Baldridge. He's the director of ag for the state of Ohio. He works for Governor DeWine. He left last Friday morning, headed to Japan with our Ohio Soybean Association. They were going to Japan, then they were going to Vietnam, for places that are buying our soybeans from here in Ohio, to go strengthen those relationships. So, those are the types of things that we have to continue to do.
Well, I'm not going to keep you here all night. I know me and you and Drake we could probably talk for hours about this stuff just because of the importance of it. And I think this is all great stuff. There's so many things I learned tonight that I didn't know, and there's so many things going on, across the entire state. And
hold up, Luddy. I got like 5 more questions for him if we.
He would answer them. I know that he would answer them. But one of the things, to get that information out, and a lot of it just has to do with, finding that right information. Don't believe everything you might hear from someone else or might read from somewhere that, isn't putting out the right information. But a lot of stuff that we learned here tonight that I think is great for, any future farmer, great for anybody that just wants to know, what is available for communities, what's available for farmers, what's available for small businesses. And there's so many things out there that can help those people. And I think you just touched on so many things that are just important, not only to a small community like Cadiz, Harrison County, but, across the entire district, across eastern Ohio, across the state. everywhere's different. We kind of
Right.
talked about that, and just finding out that information, knowing what works best for your community, knowing what works best for you, what you need, how you need it. Like that's all such great things to kind of talk about. And one of the last questions I kind of want to ask, and we're Ohio Valley people. Ohio Valley is always going to be home. So kind of in closing, you got any thoughts or comments about what we should be focused on in the immediate future to kind of make the Ohio Valley a better place?
That's a great question, and it's one that it's a big question, there's a lot of things going on. We know there's a lot of talk about data centers, about jobs, and one thing I think that we have to realize, and I don't want to be negative in this, but we really need to work and focus on our workforce. You can bring all the jobs that you want, but you have to have people to take those jobs. And I think that's a challenge. That's one challenge that we have. We also have a challenge with housing. But, once again, that's where, my colleague over at Rural Development, they have programs to help people buy homes and work with, again, community lenders to guarantee some of those first-time home buyers. You have to have a workforce. You have to have housing. You have to have broadband. You have to have those things that people have become accustomed to. And I think in Ohio Valley, I mean, we have a lot of hardworking blue collar people, and we just need to probably figure out what is it that we're missing and what can we focus on and fix ourselves as quickly as we can. Housing is something that we've talked about that, and we've watched this in Harrison County. When the gas and oil boom came, those people had rentals. I mean, the price of rent went up, and those people paid it, and and it was a double-edged sword. But it made housing a little bit unaffordable, and being able to buy a home is something that every young person would like to be able to do. And again, I think that the administration has made it very clear. We know that has to happen. And and we talked. We didn't get into this, but the foreign-owned land is a real issue that most people don't realize that even is taking place. And the president has said these big investment companies need to quit buying up all these housing complexes and let everyday Americans buy those. I mean, and that's the kind of stuff that people don't realize. If somebody can buy a home in Harrison County, which, let's face it, we're a really, really good well kept secret. The whole Ohio Valley is. My colleagues that I work with in other states and even in the Ohio House, when they found out what our taxes were here versus what their taxes were in some of the areas they live, they were like, I'm selling and moving to your part of the state because we have been the best kept secret. The reality is people are starting to figure that out, and we're seeing the price of homes, the price of property. I mean, I had a farmer today. I mean, I was at an event, and he said that the ground beside me it's coming up for auction. He says, I don't know if I can afford to buy it because there's so many people that are looking to buy property. But I think for the Ohio Valley, I think we've just got to keep our heads down. We got to keep working hard. We've got to realize that there are plenty of opportunities. There are plenty of resources out there, but we have to be able to, we've got to get over this mentality. And I think this is a mentality with a lot of people, that people like myself and others are just walking around with a blank check looking for somebody to write it. And that is not true. You know that as well as I do. But there are people out there that will help you, and you've got to make those connections and say, I want to do this. How can I do it? And it goes back to what we said earlier. They've got to have some skin in the game. We've got to be able to make sure that, they have those resources, whether it's, some local financing or whatever, and help them. But, we got to continue to work on the broadband, the infrastructure, that stuff that we talked about. Natural gas is a big problem. We've got all this natural gas here in Harrison County, and you look around, we don't have any distribution system. Ohio has a problem with distribution for natural gas. You wouldn't believe how many people said, I'd love to have natural gas, but there's no infrastructure to do it. And I think, again, as we go forward with this administration, I mean, it's no secret, drill, baby, drill. I mean, we know that we, and especially here in Eastern Ohio, we are sitting on one of the largest gas reserves in the world. And we know this administration knows what's here. You know, there was a big project announced down in Southern Ohio, you know, just this week where I think it was $33 billion. You know, I don't know all the details, but it has to do with natural gas. So, but
yeah,
you know,
I know. Welcome Back Ohio is a pretty good program that we're taking a hard look at right now within the county and at the village level. There's a lot of perks to that, and I just think with the Ohio Valley, it's not a competition amongst all the communities. What's good for one community might not be good for another, but what's good for them might help another community and what they're good at. And I think just recognizing we don't need to compete with a neighboring county. We need to work together is a big key thing to make everything successful here.
I appreciate you saying that because you're 100% right. We have got to get over this mentality. It's us versus them. It needs to be we. Yeah. We have to work together here because you're right. We might have something we can offer from Harrison County that maybe Belmont can't or Jefferson can't, but we have got to work together for the betterment of everybody. We know that.
And Luddy, you and I spoke with a lady from Wheeling who constantly said, that was almost one of the things that she said most often was, you got to reach across, not reach across the aisle, but reach across the river, because all these communities are intertwined and there's not so much of a heightened sense of competition. It's more so, how do we grow the entire valley as a whole?
You're right. I mean, and I think the thing we have to also understand is it's amazing how many people want to live in our community and drive to Pittsburgh to go to work because they don't want to live in Pittsburgh. They want to live in a rural community. And I mean, but I think you're 100% right. We and our friends in West Virginia, I work with my colleague from Pennsylvania. I work with my colleague in West Virginia. I work with all my colleagues around us because some of the things that we do are similar to what they do. But I think we've got to realize that regional connection has to be made because, I mean, I appreciate you saying because it used to be, it was like everybody was fighting amongst themselves, and a lot of times if we'd have worked together, we'd have got bigger projects, or we'd have got a project that maybe went to another part of the state or went someplace else. So, yeah,
I know that's one of the goals with Main Street Message and Harco Media Network. One of the things we want to do is expose those things to kind of let everybody see what is going on in the valley and working together and highlight those things and be able to go see some projects that are going on in the community that might not get that recognition. And like you said, a lot of people from outside the valley do love the valley. Muskingum Watershed provides so many great things that you can do recreation-wise, and these small communities all have their own niche to it that just make it a great place to live. And
you bring up the MWCD. I mean, look at the amount of people they bring into Harrison County between Tappan Lake, Clendenning Lake, and Piedmont Lake. I mean, that's that there are a lot of people. It's amazing when you get outside. You get Canton or other parts, and they, you ask them. In fact, I found out I was a little bit. I felt a little bit guilty last summer at the state fair. State Senator Michelle Reynolds from Franklin County. She covers Franklin and several. We were at the state fair, and the Wine Association was doing some event, and one of the answers to one of the questions was Tappan Lake, and I said, "Well, it's not Tappan Lake." She said, "Oh yeah, I know it's not Tappan Lake. That's where I grew up." And I said, "No, that's where I live." And she's like, "Oh no, I grew up at Tappan Lake," and I'm like, "Really?" Her family camped at Tappan Lake. She grew up in Smithfield, and it was one of those things that I had no idea. But because she was a state senator from Franklin County, but grew up in Smithfield, graduated from Buckeye Local. I mean, but again, she made that comment. She spent a lot of summers in Harrison County at Tappan Lake Park. So, but and again, that's just one example of the people. If we get them here, they like here. I mean, they like They like what we do. So, but we've got to work as a whole, and we've got to have more jobs. We've got to keep our young people here, just as we're doing in the ag world. We want them to stay, and we want to try to make it so that they can be profitable and they can make a living, raise a family. Yeah.
I truly believe that, all of it. Anything we didn't touch on, or anything you want to add that we may have missed?
Well, I guess for me, I mean, the Farm Service Agency. We have an office here in Harrison County that serves. It's a shared office between Harrison and Jefferson counties. The employees in that office, 3 of them that work in there between the Farm Service Agency and our sister agency NRCS, all graduates of Harrison Central. The rest of them, most of them are from Jefferson County, if they don't live in Harrison County. But, and again, most people don't know what the Farm Service Agency is. They don't know what we do. We deliver the disaster programs, ad hoc programs. And, we don't ever jump in the middle of a crisis unless we really have to. We always wait and assess, and then we come in after that crisis is over so that we can provide what really needs to be. Instead of putting a Band-Aid on it, we want to make sure that we heal it and not just put a Band-Aid on it. But, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I mean, I think this is great. And one thing I want to leave people with is this. Put your phones down and quit reading everything on social media. Don't listen to mainstream media, because I can tell you...
Listen to Main Street Message.
You can listen to Main Street Message, but listen to real people. Listen to somebody that you can have a relationship or a conversation with, and that you can trust. And don't think that everybody that's involved in the government is not... there's a lot of good people there, but you sometimes are only told what they want you to know. And I mean, and I've said this. I've always worked. I don't care. I tell everybody, I don't care how you're registered to vote. I don't care where you live. I don't care, what school you graduated from. We all have to work together. And I think that, for me, if I don't have an answer, I can usually help you find somebody that does have an answer. And that. And I just hate when I see people spew, false information or what they perceive to be correct, and it's not even close. And it's just frustrating to me. And I have people say, well, you know what, you can't think that the president's a good person. And my first question to them is, have you ever met the president? And their answer is no. And I said, well, neither have I. So you know what? I can't judge him, and neither can you if you've never met the man. And you can't believe everything you see on TV because, again, that's the world we live in. But I can tell you, some of the congressmen and the folks that I do work with that have a good relationship with him will tell you it's not the same person you see on TV or what he's made out to be. He truly does care about people. And I think that is something, and J.D. Vance, most people don't know this, but, J.D. Vance, he stopped at our dealership back in 2022 when he was running for U.S. Senate. And we had a 45-minute conversation. He was on his way to Steubenville, and I'll be honest, he was as real as what we are sitting in this room today. And again, that I appreciate that. And again, you have to respect the office. I mean, there's not one person I know in any political world that has done everything that I think is great or I agree with, and that's with any. I don't care what party or anything. I mean, but I think we have to remember to respect the office, respect the people that are doing the job, that try to make a difference every day. If it were easy, everybody would do it, and that's why not everybody does it.
And I think that's important on all levels of government.
It is.
Your county commissioners, your state level, your local communities, your village council, your administrators, your mayor. Reach out to those people, get the information firsthand, and then make a decision on how you feel about it.
And I think you said a lot right there, Brandon. We have no problem. I mean, I'm sure I don't, and I'm sure you don't, answering questions or helping someone understand why I voted on an issue the way I did, or what. Because again, you need to know, and this is something that I really stand on this every day. and I stood on this while I was in the legislature. You have to legislate with facts and logic, not emotion and opinion. And a lot of times, emotion and opinion will overtake somebody in a situation because they don't have the facts or the logic. And most people welcome the opportunity to explain to people, but you have to have an open mind. You have to be willing to listen. And I think you're right at any level. I mean, it's just like people would call and complain about the township. They won't fix my road. I said, have you been to a meeting? Well, no, because I don't get along with. Well, wait a minute. That's where you have to start. You have to start at the local level. And but yeah, you were right. And for me, my level was a lot higher today than what it ever has been because I do work for the Trump-Vance administration for Secretary Rollins. I mean, that they are my my bosses. Being an appointee of the administration and leading the Farm Service Agency in Ohio. And again, I can't speak other than what I can, what I know and what are the facts.
All right, sir. Well, I appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Always glad to be able to sit down and have a good conversation with you, and I think we had that tonight. Drake, thanks for sitting in. We appreciate all your insight as well. I'm just going to say, you heard everything here from Mr. Jones on Main Street Message, and I hope we get to have you back in the near future to talk a little bit more.
Would love to come back. I mean, it's one of those things that I enjoy doing things close to home. I mean, and it means a lot to me. And I'm proud to call Harrison County home, and I try not to forget where I came from because, that's the upbringing I had here and the experiences I've had here. Have gotten me to where I am today, and I truly have been blessed, and I appreciate that, and the support, from everyone, again, has been great, and again, it's not, and I'll tell you, the farmers that I work with, they appreciate the fact that there's somebody like myself in that role because it hasn't always been this way. There have been people it was a political appointee that didn't have a lot of ag background, and I appreciate, having this opportunity to work with those folks. So, but thank you, and be glad to come back.
All right. Thank you, sir. You guys heard it here.
Yep.
Mr. Don Jones.
Thank you.